This is Vampire Weekend.
It's good.
It is good, and so is this good. This conversation is going to be good as well. Hello, all. Shed here. So happy to be here with Nate Swann and Hiren Shukla. Shukla.
That's okay. You got it.
Got it on the correction. That is Vampire Weekend and Steve Lacy in the background, and we're going to lower that so we can focus on one conversation. And that conversation is on incorporating neurodiversity. I'm so pleased to be welcoming both of these gentlemen. And Nate and I were introduced through a mutual friend, Paul Mullis, Johnny Quest. Thank you, JQ, for that wonderful intro. And Nate and I connected. I heard his story about being undiagnosed with a neurodiverse diagnosis. And Nate, I won't steal your thunder. I'm going to let you share your story. And it's so interesting because you wouldn't have had the career you had if you had the diagnosis, which is like, so we'll chat about Nate's story. We'll chat about Hiren's work at Ernst & Young with neurodiversity. And quite frankly, the thing that is so interesting for me in this conversation is that this type of diversity, neurodiversity, is often blind. It's not one that we can very easily or visibly see most of the time. And so the thing that really piqued my interest in meeting both of these gentlemen is that if we can meaningfully solve for or make progress with neurodiversity, we can make progress with a whole whack of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging work. So you know the drill. Hop into the chat. Let us know where you're joining us from. So good to see Matt Dunsmore here. Hey, my friend. And please keep the comments, the questions coming for Nate and Hiren as we get going here. Hiren, happy to pass over to you just to say hello and what brings you here. And then Nate will do the same. We'll talk about what neurodiversity is, how we can solve for it, and then see what questions and comments come in. Sound good?
Yeah. Thank you very much, Ed. Super excited to be here today, dialing in from great state of Texas. And the last 7 years for me as a neurotypical and as an ally, as an individual who wants to celebrate diversity, I had a unique opportunity to intersect what happens in the organizational space, need to create value, and how inclusion is at the core of innovation. And so, Shed, I love my job because I feel like I get to make a difference every day and start changing cultures and improving leadership. So excited to be here.
Beautiful. Amazing. And Hiren, I know there's a personal sort of story from your upbringing that has also made this work important to you. Let's hop to Nate. Nate, share sort of your tie-in on this, and then Hiren, maybe we can circle back because I remember you shared with me an experience for you when you kind of didn't feel included, which even though you're neurotypical, you can still have empathy toward, others' experiences. So Nate, over to you, my friend. Happy to hear more from you and even sort of your story that's brought you here.
Hey, everyone. This is actually a really exciting topic for me to have a chance to discuss, seeing as how I went 36 years without ever knowing that I was neurodiverse. So the interesting thing for me is as Shed kind of alluded to, had I been diagnosed as a child, as most folks generally are, the career that I have had thus far would have never been possible. Which is really kind of surprising when you really kind of think about it, because I'm a retired Army officer. So I was an Army Aviation officer. So I flew helicopters and airplanes, doing a mixture of different mission sets that the U.S. Army needed me to do. I flew some of the most advanced helicopters in the world with the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, where I had a chance to, take U.S. Army Rangers and Delta Force guys to some of the deepest, darkest places of the world. I had a chance to fly airplanes at high altitudes, doing some deep sensing for our U.S. customers and our partners around the world. And all of this would never have been possible if I walked into the Army at age 18 and said, "Hey, I want to be in the Army," and been diagnosed as neurodiverse. So I went 14 years in my career, having a very successful career as a junior officer and as a mid-grade senior leader, and never really had any real issues up until a complexity of things kind of all came together between moved to new positions, moved to a new area I had never been before, we had our daughter in our family and things. So we had both family struggles as well as work struggles as you kind of continue to progress up the career path. And all of this stuff kind of came to a head. If you've never been thrown out of a VTC for yelling at everyone across the VTC because you think something else is going on, feel free to message me. I'm happy to explain how that feels and how that works. I had a really rough, morning with everyone, and ultimately knew that, okay, this is just not the way people interact with other people, and I knew that there was something going on, and I didn't know what was actually the problem. And so I went to go see all units and stuff like that. Generally speaking, have some sort of psychological behavioral health therapist or something like that aligned with them. And went to go see ours, and I was just like, hey, am I going crazy? Am I having like early onset Alzheimer's or something? I'm 36 years old. I don't think that's too much of a problem, but I'm like, I'm having so many issues and not really understand what's going on. And I'm talking about this fast, and the provider looks at me, she's like, do you always talk this fast? And I was like, yes, I do. My family, we call it swan squawk. This is just how we talk. This is how we interact. This is just the normal thing that we do. I've done it my whole life. And this is just kind of how we interact with folks and my family. And she was like, that's interesting. Have you ever been diagnosed with ADHD? And I laughed, and I was like, well, of course not. I'm a pilot. There's no way that I could have probably been diagnosed for this stuff and then done whatever I've done. But over the next couple of months, we kind of do the research and come to find out I do have some deficits in just how I process and see the world. And with proper treatment, have now found a much better quality of life, a much better way of living. I choose to take medication. That's helped both my relationships with both my coworkers as well as my family. And life has improved greatly since being diagnosed at age 36. I was later diagnosed at age 38, age 37 for autism. So I technically am on the spectrum as a member of the Asperger's group. And so a lot of those things have become comorbidities and things. And because of all of that, and looking back on what my career has been, and understanding that I have led 500-person plus organizations that are worldwide organizations and people and stuff all over the world. My phone was never turned off. The sun never set on organizations and things. And I was able to do all of that without any issue, both pre and post diagnosis. And yet, had I ever been diagnosed in the first place, I never would have made that kind of impact in the world. And so that's where I think we need to really start solving for X. And the X problem is really the neurodiversity, neurotypical factor as we look at it kind of across the globe. Because as we've talked about before, the reality is neurodiversity affects everyone. It affects all colors, all races, all sexes, all genders, all everything. And if you can get to the heart of the neurodiversity conversation and focus organizations and cultures and leadership on how do I take this individual and their way they perceive the world and be able to interact with them effectively and be able to lead, teach, coach, mentor them individually, we can have a quality relationship, we can have a quality organization, and we can achieve a lot more inside the organization without a whole lot of change, because we're focusing our energies on what does that individual need. And when we do that for one, and we do that for another, and we do that for another, it's almost a snowball effect. It really is. And not only, I'm going to take a little bit of Hiren's side of this, not only do you see the positive impact to the organization, both neurotypical and neurodiverse, but the leader themselves also starts to see a huge impact to how they interact with the world and how they have positive interactions, both personally and professionally across the organization. So ever since, my diagnosis, I've been, hey, let's figure out how we can spread this message and help others, maybe who aren't diagnosed yet, be able to get the help that they need and to become a better citizen of the world, or let's help organizations see that, hey, it's not as debilitating, it's not as diseased name or something like that, as we really want to make it out to be, or like you might see in the media or something like that on Rain Man or something like that. That's not exactly the same, and the vast majority of folks that are neurodiverse don't really fall into the category at all.
Wow, thank you so much, Nate. That's great. And awesome to see Alex Zaharis here in South Lake Tahoe, representing EY along here with Hiren. I mean, Hiren, before we go back and hear sort of your story that got you here as a neurotypical, I mean, you are very much on the forefront of creating organizations that embrace neurodiversity and help to create organizations where neurodiversity is embraced. Can you share more? I mean, should we, gentlemen, define what do we mean by neurotypical and neurodiverse? And then how do we create more, or along DEIB, how can we incorporate neurodiversity into that as well?
Sure, Shed, thank you. The terminology here keeps evolving. And so if we step back for a moment, neurodiversity is the dimension of diversity that represents the entire realm of cognitive thinking styles in the world. So neurodiversity is like biodiversity. We're all a part of it because whether we're neurotypical or neurodistinct, we all have different thinking styles. And where we then look at the majority of the world's population has been designed, created, communicated by neurotypicals who converge in the way they think, they act, they speak, they communicate. What's happened is that the neurodistinct community, those that have an inherent cognitive difference, and my friend Nate mentioned some of these, autism, Asperger's, dyslexia, ADHD, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia, there's a number of inherent hardwired cognitive variation that aren't normal variations, in fact. And this interesting profile, Nate, as you talked about, I smiled when you mentioned your video teleconference episode that you had, because you've told me that story before. These spiky profiles, I'm really good at something. I mean, Nate, you flew some of the most complicated machinery in the world. Frankly, I don't think I can do it. Shit, I'll put you in the same boat as me for that.
Sure.
But, how we communicate with each other, all of this comes shed to the question around why should people and organizations care about this? And some of this leads to my own story, which is as an Indian who was born in East Africa, I was a third generation person born in East Africa. We were fleeing genocide, my family of 7, landed in New York. And frankly, as we think about the melting pot that, we said New York was in the US, a feeling of belonging. And Shed, this goes to that comment of diversity, inclusion, but what about equity and belonging?
Mm-hmm.
And how do you feel as a person? For me, Indian, born in Africa, my language was a combination of Indian dialect and African dialect. I had no idea. So even when I spent 5 years in India, I really didn't fit in. I moved to Texas. I still felt like, boy, I feel really different. I don't feel like I'm everybody else. And so you end up suppressing, I think, kind of getting smaller in yourself. And this is the inflection point for opportunity for organizations, whether it's EY or it's others. What if you can really provide that safe space, the psychologically safe space for that term that we've all heard, bring your whole self to work?
Mm-hmm.
Well, when I bring my whole self to work, there's a lot of baggage that comes with this too. And unless I feel supported, unless I feel safe, I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to say things that maybe nobody else is thinking. This is where I'm going to innovate. This is where ideation is going to come from. And Shed, this is the value opportunity that we saw 7 years ago when I founded this neurodiversity model, not at EY, and now we've helped 65 other organizations to say, you're thinking about transformation and how to have the most agile and resilient workforce. We know the last 2 years of the pandemic has exacerbated this conversation. How do we make people feel included so that we increase personal resiliency that accumulates into organizational resiliency? And how are we going to balance, as we've all seen now on Zoom and Teams, someone's cat comes into the picture, or the dog starts barking because the FedEx guy is here. This is life. This happens all the time. If we make people and allow individuals to feel safe, we will unlock value that is sitting under our noses. In the neurodistinct community that has been on the fringe of the workforce, this is an additional opportunity. So our organizations, the last thing I'll say, Shed, organizations, public, private, nonprofit, educational, we already have neurodivergent, neurodistinct team individuals here. They're already part of us. But instead of forcing and creating an environment where people have to pretend, there's a term that's called masking, which I have heard, where somebody has to pretend to be like others. This is not a psychologically safe environment, and it's stressful, and it creates stress and anxiety. And this is the opportunity for leaders and for others to say, how do we get better at inclusion and belonging and creating true equity?
Yeah. And this, I mean, the conversation on diversity, equity, inclusion. I mean, first of all, they're distinct and different things. And it's a source of strength. When we have more diverse perspectives, we have a more holistic view, and it means we can actually include and better serve more people internally and externally, that it's actually good for business. It gets better results. Fair?
100%.
Yeah. And I think it's worthwhile defining each of these terms. So diversity is, the way I like to think about it is, you have different colored jelly beans. Like, diversity is, do we have everything here, right? Are people represented? Then equity is fair treatment, access, opportunity, and advancement. Inclusion, a variety of people have power and voice and decision-making authority. So diversity, equity, and inclusion aren't the same things. And when we have those, we get belonging as a result. Is that fair, the way I'm describing it from your?
Yeah, it's beautiful. And Shed, what we've seen is the journey has to end with belonging, because if it doesn't get there, you've done performatory theater around diversity and inclusion. Yeah. And people say, I still don't yet feel like my unique life experience is valuable to contribute to wherever I am. And, we think about, again, Nate, I say your amazing career that you had in the military. Imagine, again, to your point, if that diagnosis prevented you from doing all these great things that you did.
Yeah.
I couldn't echo you more. What I would say is I think what ends up happening is, in different organizations, we like to find, and you'll always hear me kind of pick on engineers. I love engineers. My mother's an engineer, but engineers are always easy to pick on. When you want an engineer, or you want a leader of engineers, you're going to hire another engineer, and you're going to stack engineers on top of each other, whatever those things. And you're going to wonder why you're not being inventive anymore and not finding new ideas, because you've developed groupthink inside of your own organization, and you're not actually broadening the pool. You're not mixing in more talent and more ideas when you have the same type of thing growing up inside of it. The military is very much the same way. I have love for the military. I'm fourth generation military. And we know that there's a little bit of a genetic, component to neurodiversity. So it's kind of interesting how long this may have been going on in my family of getting through this. But I see that to say, the military very much, they're looking for a specific type of person. They're looking for a type of individual who's going to be a good fit and, do a lot of, following orders and doing things. None of that's necessarily wrong, other than the perspective of when we start slicing out different diverse groups of people, maybe we're not as innovative, and maybe we're not as, targeting different types of opportunities that may be out there, both in real time, when you're really fighting wars and the bullets are really flying at you, as well as when you're looking at it from the perspective of planning and organizing and then advising. As a military officer, my job was always to advise my civilian leadership that, hey, this is my best military advice. It may not be the best political advice, and you may not like to hear what I have to say per se, which is where the neurodiverse piece kind of comes in. I'm like, I got no problem telling you what you may or may not like to hear. And you may come across that quite a bit with folks in the community, but they are going to be honest and truthful and have a lot of knowledge and experience of what they're adding to the conversation. And oftentimes what you'll see is you'll see this opportunity where you may not have been able to cross that bridge previously. But now, because someone has introduced something or added something to it, because you have a broader perspective, because you have more inclusive environment, you now can start seeing the gaps and the holes, and you can kind of, juke and jive on the court or whatever it was in different ways that you may not have been able to do before, because you kept thinking, I got to throw the deep ball every time, right? And not wondering why I can't just, run and get 10 yards. So that is something that I think is really exciting to see when you start opening up the aperture of the neurodiverse community and bringing in people from different backgrounds and different experiences. I really think what you'll start seeing is the opportunities start really bubbling up inside your organization, because people will feel safe and they will feel part of the organization, and they'll want to give even more of themselves because they see that the organization is giving back to them as much as they're willing to give to the organization.
Beautiful, beautiful. And so what I'm hearing, Nate, is sometimes you might not get the most politically correct version, but it is truthful. And here to my friend Matt Dunsmore's point around psychological safety, it's not about being nice. Psychological safety is about being kind, right? I'll take from Kim Scott's work with Radical Candor. I don't love the title of the book because, let's face it, most people read covers of books, not books themselves. And so sometimes when we can read Radical Candor, it's like, oh, I can get away with being a jerk. No, it's about challenge directly and care personally. It's those two things. But it doesn't mean that we can't disagree or challenge or share hard truths. Those are hallmarks of a psychologically safe culture.
And as a leader, I'll throw one more thing in there too. As a leader, one of the things, especially after I was diagnosed, I taught my junior officers I was working around, is like, hey, it's okay to fail. I can let you fail without making you or the organization a failure. It's okay to trip up and learn, because that's how you get better. So if you have a good idea, or you have an opportunity, or you see something that you could potentially action, go do that. You have the empowerment to do that. I'm giving you plenty of rope to do whatever it is that you need. And one way or the other, we're either going to hang both of ourselves. But the other part of it too is I have your back, and I am very much willing to let you go learn and grow and do to be able to do things. And what that really allowed us to be able to do is really expand our environment and be able to do things that we never thought was possible before. And those young officers, where they may have taken 3, 4, 5 more years to have learned something, they could have learned it in 6 months. And so it allowed them that flexibility and things to be able to do some of that work, all because I knew that, hey, I had to fail a lot and grow a lot in my process. And if I come back around and do it again, it was very helpful for them. Whereas perfection is kind of seen as the way of things. It's like you can't show any possible failure or any possible techniques of chinks in the armor and that kind of stuff as you're going through the office space. That's not establishing a culture of belonging. That's not establishing a culture of innovation, because you have to grow. And the only way to grow is to, trip and fall a whole bunch. And so I think the neurodiverse community does that quite well, because we've been accustomed to tripping and falling a whole bunch our whole lives. And so we really are good at picking ourselves back up quickly and say, okay, well, that didn't work. Let's try something else now, and see where else we can go from there, and not, being so connected to their individual solution, but focused on the problem and how do we get to the answer to the problem, however it takes to get there.
Beautiful. Yeah, that culture you describe with no failures at all, that's called an inhumane culture, because Humans make mistakes. Brilliant work by David Marquet, who wrote the book Turn the Ship Around, if you two aren't familiar with it, or if anyone here isn't, who's listening isn't familiar with it, where Marquet talks about, as a leader, he wants to give control away, but as a leader, we can't just go around giving control out. We need pillars underneath us empowering and giving control away, which is clarity and competence.
Yeah.
So long as everyone knows this is what success is here on this team, department, organization as a whole, and then ensuring your people have the competencies, both technical and human. I see, Joshua, your question here, which we'll get to. I don't like calling them soft skills. I like calling them human skills or human attributes, right?
Yeah.
They aren't soft, they're hard.
Shed, I'll just say one thing, because we recently renamed soft skill to be essential skills.
Nice.
They're essential. We all
love
need
that.
it. And we've even taken it a step further. We said it isn't enough to be even empathetic, because unless we're compassionate in our effort to include others, to lift them up. Nate, he said, as you keep falling, what if you had somebody as a guide who said, hey, around that corner, there's a big bump there. So I'm just telling you before you get there. But we thought, boy, how do we as leaders lean in on compassion, especially today when in the last 2 years, we felt so disconnected? It is up to organizations and leaders to make us feel that we belong, we're together.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so empathy is a feeling, compassion is an action.
I love that.
And there's emotional empathy and cognitive empathy.
Yeah.
So like Hiren, I may never have emotional empathy for what it feels like to be Indian-born, African-raised. Like, I can try, but I can't actually feel that. But I can have cognitive empathy, which is more on the thinking side. Sure. Too much emotional empathy means I feel what you feel and can actually get in the way.
Yes.
But empathy leads to compassion, which is empathy in action. I love that. Let's get to Joshua's question here. It's a great question. It's big, so it's covering our faces, so we'll get through it. It's great. Some of the, let's call them essential skills or attributes and sales methodologies taught at companies are in direct conflict with some of the key differences presented in ADHDers. Think working memory, executive dysfunction, and rejection dysphoria. You all may know more about that than I do, so let's keep going. How does someone navigate that, either in the moment or as a career choice? How can leaders best influence that culture to be more inclusive while still building an organization that may inherently be at odds with someone's lived neurodiverse experience? A brilliant and a bit of a complicated perhaps question here, but it's a great question. So let's unpack it. And Nate and Hiren, I'd love your help in that. What do you think here?
I'll start first, and then Nate, you have a lived experience on this, so I'm going to then defer to you. But Joshua calls out something that is a critical inflection point. How directly are we acknowledging and celebrating the differences in people? And part of what happens at organizations, Joshua, that you call out in terms of sales methodology and skills, is in almost a channel of assimilation. How do we create more of the same? Whereas organizations that will truly celebrate diversity are acknowledging the differences to say, Joshua, you as a salesperson versus Shed versus Nate versus Hiren, we're all different. What if we were to put us together? We would be an amazing team, because maybe Joshua, you're great at contracting and I'm great to set up, but Shed's great at the finish and Nate's great at the financials. But there's differences as opposed to making everyone the same. And I think the inflection point for me, Shed, here is which organizations are brave enough to actually celebrate outwardly the differences. And when we started our own neurodiversity journey, speaking to this very directly for something that is invisible, Shed, as you said before, finally told many in the community, we see you, we acknowledge you. We want you to be safe being yourself. We're not going to try to change you to be anybody else. And I think that some organizations are further. Others are ambitiously starting. But I think that that's one of the places that I suggest often for individuals to look for and to feel comfortable being yourself, because frankly, if that organization can't support you as you are, maybe that's not a great place to be.
Nice. Nate, what else do you have here?
No, I got a couple of notes. As I kind of take the question apart a little bit. What I would say is first off, when you start talking generalizations when it comes to neurodiversity, and this is a common misconception, right? It's a spectrum for a reason, right? When you meet one person on the spectrum, you've met one person on the spectrum, right? And oftentimes we disassociate autism and the spectrum versus everything else that's neurodiversity. But there is a lot of cognitive overlap between a lot of these things, right? So you could almost look at neurodiversity as a whole, as a spectrum of its own on a whole. And depending on where you are, it's almost kind of like if you looked at DNA, right? If you look at DNA, you got long pieces and short pieces, and some things are missing and some things are full and that kind of stuff. It's very similar almost with neurodiversity, that you may have some things that are really, really strong and some things that aren't as strong as you kind of move across it. So what I would say is as you have individuals, whether they be ADHD or what have you, that are different, the first thing to probably do as the leader would be is to take them under your wing, sit down with them and say, hey, before we place you in this environment, what are your struggles and what are the things that you have difficulty with? Because we all acknowledge, as the leader, you got to kind of do a little bit of the honest broker stuff up front. It's like, look, I've got struggles too. I have a hard time taking notes in board meetings, that sort of stuff. I sometimes have a hard time keeping my mind on things or whatever it was. It may not be to the same deficit as yourself. However, because I also know that this is just a human dynamic, and it's not necessarily just, you're the weirdo, neurodiverse guy or whatever those things. It's a human thing. What are your struggles, and how can we prepare you better before we put you in the environment where we expect you to be able to step up and do things? And then that's where career management, that's where, leadership development, that's where, training and development, really starts coming into play. Because you can focus their energies on, hey, well, these are some areas that may be difficult for you. Let's make sure that we develop that, because you're so good in all this other stuff. And we really want to broaden you and put you, be more of that square peg in a square hole. Right now, you're a round peg in a square hole and have some gaps. And that's okay. Everyone's basically in that same boat, but we got to fill that boat. So it's almost like you're having the same discussion whether they're neurodiverse or neurotypical.
Nate,
doesn't matter.
You hit that spot on. And Shed, I'll just quickly address Joshua's last piece, right? How can leaders best influence this? And where we've seen this now, transformational leadership is first somebody willing to talk about it. You got to take this out in the open. There's nothing about it in the shadows, nothing to be embarrassed or think about. This is grounded in deficits and disabilities. Yes. We have to talk about, Shed, what you touched on. Diverse teams produce incredible results. Transformational leaders will produce incredible results with a diverse team. So leaders influence culture by doing the actual work, producing results. And frankly, diverse organizations and teams will always outproduce less diverse. So let the numbers and metrics speak for themselves, because I think that the shift from a charitable, philanthropic, corporate social responsibility point of view, we feel bad as an organization, we're going to write a check. This is easy to write a check, okay? That's a very short-term piece. Are you willing to do the work, including the hard work that retains the integrity that gets to scalability and sustainability? Because if you don't create those pathways at the end of the day, and which I confess, not every individual is made out for sales. That's okay. But there's probably 10 other things that you're great at to do. But I think Nate hit the nail on the head. This is the same approach for whoever you are, whether you're neurodivergent or neurotypical. But I think that that's where leaders can make a tremendous difference impacting the culture of their organizations.
Nice.
I'll sprinkle one little last, cherry on top of that one and say, I think it really, for the organizational change piece, it really starts at both levels. It starts at the individual leader to subordinate level that you interact with on a daily basis. But as Hiren was just saying, and we've agreed on this completely, it also starts at the top, and they meet somewhere in the middle, right? So it is absolutely a top-down, bottom-up refinement, activity that when the whole organization is bought in on it, right? And it can't just be bottom-up, right? Bottom-up things always fail, right? It's got to be top-down, and they got to believe in it. Right, they've got to actually believe in it and actually put some actual muscle into proving that they're willing to do this. I'm not saying you need to hire a neurodiversity, champion or something like that or whatever, was just to be on the board. So that's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is they really have to be willing to put in the effort, because what we're talking about here is really getting to know your people and having that personal interaction with someone. They're not just a cog in the machine. They're not just someone who provides a service between the hours of 9 and 5 and they go home and you worry about them the next day between 9 and 5. This is a real human with real challenges and real needs, immaterial of whether or not they're neurodiverse or neurotypical. And if you treat everyone in that same boat and develop a culture where everyone generally, no kidding, actually cares about everyone else in the organization, it's amazing where the organization can possibly get.
Nice. A couple of things I'll sprinkle in and add in, and then keep any questions and comments coming. So one, change in an organization can happen in two ways: evolution top down, revolution bottom up. Revolution is typically more aggressive and usually leads with a Jerry Maguire situation where someone revolts so much that they stick out and stand out and go to the side unless the evolution embraces it. The other thing I'm noticing in this, so Joshua, as you asked this really brilliant and well thought out question, is awareness and culture. So there's no mistake that every single leadership development program that has ever existed all starts with the same module: know thyself, like every single one. And this is something we can always work on, is self-awareness. What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? What are my blind spots? We cannot read the label on the jar when we're inside the jar. This is why we have assessments and we have mentors and coaches. And I might point out to Nate or Hiren, you're really good at this. And they're like, oh, I didn't think that was that special. I thought everyone could do that. No, turns out it's a superhuman power, right? So I think there's that piece, which is awareness. But then, Joshua, if you or anyone is in a situation where something isn't coming easy for you as a learner, I think hopefully we're in cultures where we can raise our hand and say, this isn't easy for me, I need help. If the response is, no, you don't, or you're worthless or whatever, that is not a psychologically safe environment. Yeah. I would hope that you're able to find a better leader or better area or a different organization if you are able. And then, I could say to the three of us, you know what, guys, I think we have something here. We should start a traveling three-mend ballerina thing here. Like, we should go on the road. I think we can all be professional ballerinas. And Nate might be like, hey, Shed, I don't think we should do that, right? Which is, I think then it comes to a point where once we know more about ourselves, we should make choices that help, that more align with our strengths.
And Shed, to that point, the race for talent today, as we know, is greater than ever.
Yep.
The agility and the availability of resources anywhere in the world, hybrid environments, remote environments. At the end of the day, you need great people to be committed and engaged, to feel safe. And to Nate's point, you'll produce great results. I mean, the formula is actually not complicated. It's the ability to execute consistently in that formula, where we see, wow, how is it that we're stumbling? Because the relationship with employees today and anyone in your is more important than ever. And we're doing it through a screen so many of the time. So how do we become more deliberate and conscious to get to know our people and say, I really want to help you be successful in what you enjoy doing and what you're great at.
Yeah. And environment matters, right? You put a cucumber in pickle brine, 10 times out of 10, that shit's going to turn into a pickle. Meaning, if you take a great, talented, wonderful person and put them in a cruddy environment with awful leaders, that person is not going to be high trusting and high performance because they're in a bad environment. Yeah. And so the environment that leaders create really matters here.
Okay. I think real fast, and I think that may even be more so important with the neurodiverse community. They are more sensitive in many cases to how they interact there, both at work, with their coworkers and that sort of thing. And so getting to understand the individual and what their needs are. Maybe their needs are they need a quiet space in the corner. I've always had the discussion with folks where it's like, when you bring everyone, bring all the talent together and we pull all the expertise into the room, and little Johnny over there is the nice quiet one who never says anything, right? But he may be one of the smartest dudes in the whole room. When little Johnny's finally willing to raise his hand and say, hey, I think I have something to say, that's where the leader steps up and say, everyone else will be quiet. Johnny never says anything, but I bet you whatever he has to say is going to be really important. And if you build environments where that is is possible and people feel comfortable doing that, you'll change your organization and what your organization can accomplish, almost overnight.
Yeah, and I think we design organizations far too much, and even in this remote setting where the loudest voices and most extroverted voices and most convincing, influential voices are the ones that are rewarded. One of my favorite things to do in a meeting, whether it's in room or virtual, is to say, hey, I know a bunch of you that have yet to speak up are thinking hard. And so I'm not going to force call on you. I might, but know that we want your voice. So if you're here, just bleh,
absolutely. And Shed, it's interesting. You made me think about how have we been successful in the last 7 years, launching in 7 countries and 14 cities around the world, more than tripling during the pandemic, and at 92% retention in a 6.5-year period. This sounds unheard of, particularly when we're talking about skills around artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, data science. I mean, we're talking the hardest things to get. This is the value that we're seeing in this unseen, overlooked, undersupported community that has a tremendous amount to offer. Not everybody. It is a spectrum, Nate, as you rightfully say. But the changes, the tweaks that organizations are willing to make, everything from, is your job description the kitchen sink? Because if it is, let me tell you, you're looking for Superman, Superwoman, super they, them, or theirs. That doesn't exist. Neurodivergent candidates will often self-screen themselves out by just looking at the job description. Are you willing to adjust your interview process from a behavioral based, let me see how witty this person is and how much I like them, to a performance-based process that observes individuals? And then lastly, are you willing to provide the support that said, when I invite Hiren to a meeting, if I don't give him some knowledge in advance, why are you coming to this meeting? What is it that I expect from you? What should you? And then we say, like the old V8 commercial where you hit yourself in the head, like, why didn't we think about this before? Because who in our organization doesn't want clarity and explicitness and proactiveness? So this beauty around universal application, universal design, Shed, you said at the beginning, if we can really drive inclusion and belonging with our neurodivergent community, that aperture can open up so wide to others because there's a lot of learning that's there. And we're adjusting now to the individual as opposed to saying, well, our organization is in this lane, so unless you fit in this lane, sorry, you can't be here.
Yeah. Good. And good luck with your talent strategy on that one. Joshua, pickles are good. I was simply using cucumbers and pickles to prove a point about culture. Enjoy your pickles. All good. Gentlemen, as we begin to land and plan in this conversation, I mean, please, for those listening and with us, please keep the questions and comments coming because we still do have 10 or so minutes. I'm curious to know what progress you are seeing and what progress we still need to make and see. I know this is Autism Awareness Month. My question to you is, okay, what have been the wins and where are we still falling behind? And yeah, what's to celebrate and what's to come?
Yeah. So Nate, if you're okay, I'll jump in first.
Absolutely.
And I give you, as we think about the journey, Shed, from awareness to education to engagement with stakeholders, and lastly, the end of the rainbow, implementation of some change. And that four-step process, we are seeing the ecosystem of business. So it's the employment sector, it's government, it's the education system, it's our nonprofits, the self-advocacy groups. We're seeing those ecosystems coming together more than ever. And so more organizations today are engaged in some neurodiversity level of awareness or education or engagement or implementation. It's still very slow, if I'm honest. And part of the challenges, now the flip side, is all of this change takes supply, support, organization amongst this entire ecosystem, right? Business and government and academia and nonprofit. And part of the challenge today is getting that support. Where do you go for this? And that's part of a challenge. Our vocational rehab agencies are working really hard. Our workforce commissions are really thinking about it. Boot camps are doing a lot. Nonprofits do a lot, but it's still very disparate. And so it almost is a heavy lift for organizations to try to move. That's one issue. The second issue, and I'll then hand off to my friend Nate on this, is it's Autism Awareness Month. Awareness is good. Acceptance, even better. But you know what supersedes all of these? Action. So we think about this as Autism Action Month. What are you going to do? And not just in the month of April. What are you going to do these other 11 months of the year? Because that's where you put your money where your mouth is. And you don't just celebrate the diversity during that month, because next month is going to be something else. And so, Nate, let me pause and hand off to you on this.
No, it's really a great question, Shed. And, I think, first off, we have such a diverse generational workforce right now that we're seeing so many different kinds of people out there that, if nothing else, the youngest generation of the workforce are super willing to have all these conversations.
Yeah.
They'll talk to you about any kind of problem they have and that kind of stuff. And they expect their leaders to be able to have those candid conversations back with them, right? So I think we're growing into an environment. Again, I'm very much a futurist in the way I see the world today. I think we're growing into a world where we will have more of these conversations, and it will become more apparent. And the things that divide us today will not be the things that divide us in 10 or 15 years. Because the workforce and the generational change that we've seen over the last 5-10 years will continue to grow, and it will become more commonplace as we look at the globe of the next 10 or 15 years. So that's the wonderful part, is we're having the conversations. And right now, I think the problem with it is it's a squeak. It's a mouse whisper or something like that. It doesn't overflood the rest of the conversations going on out there. And so that's where we need to work on. And that's where Hiren and I really believe the leadership piece has to be the piece that really gets the influence. In my own career in the military, a lot of times you saw people who were successful because they did the same thing the last guy did. Right? They didn't induce change. They didn't revel things up and stuff like that. And they know what success is, because here's the nice, pretty track. Do exactly like this, and you'll be successful at the end. And I tell folks all the time when I interact with them, I'm like, look, people, the reality is this: the only constant in the universe is change. This second in the universe is different from the last second because we've moved. Things have happened. The air has transitioned. There's a comet out there somewhere doing its thing. The reality is there's so many things changing around us all the time. If we don't live in a change accepting world, then we're staying at the back of the bus, and we're not moving, and we're stuck wherever we are. And so I think if we can get leaders to start seeing the world from a different perspective, not their historical past that made them successful, which that's the hard thing. They were successful based off of their past. Now, hey, your success is going to be based not on your past, but on how you establish the success of the future. And how you lay the tracks and the groundwork for the future folks to supersede you I'm going to butcher this. I'm a big Star Wars fan, but I'm going to butcher this. In the Last Jedi, they make a very clear comment where it's, Yoda's talking to Luke and is like, hey, we are the ones that they are supposed to supersede. As leaders, we're supposed to develop the next generation to be better than us, to exceed us and do more than us. And the only way to do that is to set the groundwork for their success, not our continued success. And so I think that's where we need to see the changes at the leadership level, at all leadership levels, kind of across the globe.
Yeah. I think the future of leadership is kinder than our version of leadership we have today. I think it is trending. Nate, a question. 18-year-old Nate in 2022, with a diagnosis you had at 36, 37, would they let you in or no?
No.
And that needs to change.
I couldn't agree with you more, right? So, the reality of it is, and the same thing that Hiren has said, right? So the military is very much kind of in this world of, talent management and trying to figure out how it's going to fight the talent wars of the future. And they acknowledge they're behind the times in the way that they see the world. Not speaking on behalf of the military, but ultimately, looking at it from the perspective of, hey, the problem with it is we look for the same type of person, and we're looking for someone who fits our little box, and they can do this. The reality is maybe it's not the best fit for the entire Army, but it's a great fit for this unit or this type of job or this type of role, and we don't ever expect them to do anything other than that role, and that's okay. Right. And so whether that is opening up more long-term civilian jobs that work directly for the military, or whether that is, we bring them in as soldiers and we put them into a career path where they stay in that world and they never really kind of branch out of that, but they're an expert in what they do. Maybe that's really a good direction to kind of look at and see where we can't find some leadership development and change in key areas for things like, again, strategy, for cyber, for space, for a lot of these other, emerging, threats that are out there that, that's one of the largest components of the Chinese army right now is their cyber force. That shows how much they're putting, national level effort into a particular problem set. We don't do the same thing.
Well, and Nate, I'll add a couple of things that we are starting to see. Israeli Defense Force has a cyber unit specifically for neurodivergent individuals. They see the value. The intelligence agency in the UK celebrates and actively looks for the ability to think differently in the individuals with dyslexic individuals and others, because they see the amazing value. So I'm optimistic, Shed and Nate, that we're starting to see better. I think the pace though is slow, and maybe. On that note, I do see a question that maybe connects to what we were just talking about with Nate.
Perfect. Matt Dunsmore, this is our final question here. As we think about attracting new and creating a sense of equity and safety for our existing Neurodiverse team members, do you have any ideas that you've seen work in making people feel valued and welcomed?
I'll throw out a couple of things, and Nate would love your obviously lived experience on it. But Matt, we've seen first and foremost acknowledgement. Is your organization talking about this? And if there's not acknowledgement, and then discussion, and make that whether it's a listening session or but it's celebrating the diversity that you have there. And it starts with education and awareness and terminology and some of the things that we started today. But if you're not willing to do the action part, the adjustments that needed, and the adjustments are small. We'll give you our own experience. Some have been, I need a quiet place to sit. Others will say, I need noise canceling headsets. One of our team members has 4 different monitors or screens because the way his brain is rapid fire working. He actually segments email on one, his spreadsheets on another, his research on a third, and these are such easy adjustments that may not be quote unquote the norm in the accommodations world. But if you listen and have the trust of your employees to tell you this, then you're going to help meet their needs, as unique as they may be. But Nate?
No, it's a great question, and what I would say first is you have to understand that the younger generation probably has a better understanding of where they are in the on the spectrum, if you will, if they are neurodiverse, neurotypical, or somewhere in between. The middle-aged and older generation probably doesn't. You know, there are 70-something-year-old men and women out there getting their diagnoses because they have gone their whole lives, and the only reason why they found out about it was because their grandson or daughter just happens to be neurodiverse, and they're like, hey, they're just like me. And then they go get the help they need. They've gone 70 years without help and support.
Wow.
And so if you think about it, there are people in your own organization right now, you know, 5 to 10% of your organization, most likely, that are neurodiverse, and vast majority of them probably don't even know it. So what I would first lean on is, let's talk about mental health in general. Let's talk about, hey, we all go to mental health. We all need the help that we need. If you break a bone, you go see the doctor, they fix the bone. If you break your head, you go to the doctor, they fix your head. It's that simple. And so talking about those types of things and getting people to start thinking about that, I think is critically important. Step 2. The folks that do know they're neurodiverse, or the folks that may think they're neurodiverse and they're not really sure and stuff like that, if you start having, just like Hiren was saying, start having the conversations around, hey, what do you need to be successful? What is it that we can do as an organization to help you grow and make sure that you have the tools necessary to be able to perform at your best? When you start focusing on the individual, like, hey, what is it you need to be successful, and what do you need to be the best? People are pretty easy to tell you, hey, I need the following things, right? If I just had this, I can do so much more, right? And then it's down to the leader to resource it, right? It may be a weird request, just like Hiren was saying, right? You know, weird in its own essence, right? So I can only work in a room that's painted pink. You know,
was that Nate? What was that? Can you say that again? I was trying to make a joke. I can only work in a room with.
It's like I can only work in a room that's painted pink. You know, so it's like, hey, you know, there are different needs for different people, and if we can find ways to meet as many of those as possible. Now, don't get me wrong. There are plenty of folks that are on the spectrum that will likely never join the workforce because their disability is that great. That's not who we're targeting. That's not really who we're talking about. If we can empower them in ways, I would love to be able to see the world be able to do that. But what you're seeing is 85% of the population of neurodiverse folks don't fall in that category.
No, oh, sorry, Nate, I was going to just say something really interesting to what you just said. I can only work in a room that's pink. We just shot a video with a neurodivergent artist who has created a pink room that's fuzzy in the metaverse that you can go into. So we say, how creative do you have to be to think about this? But Nate, your comment triggered me to think about that. So sorry for jumping in.
No, it's perfect. And the reality of it is, you know, I think if we look less at the disability and just look more at the human and the individual, what do they need to be successful? You'll start seeing so much, you know, positive change and growth inside your own organization that you won't have to worry about the fact that they are different. You'll just be able to empower them to be successful because you've given them the tools and resources to be able to do so.
Nice. A quick little story on this, and I believe it was with 2 neurotypicals, but I think it proves the point. I was coaching with one of my clients who's a CIO of a large organization, and his EA, who's great, strategic, amazing, had COVID, mild case, was still working, and put in an amazing week of work. And now this person, the CIO, was with the company for maybe 2 months, maybe even less, didn't know their EA so well. And he said, you know what, I'm going to get her flowers. And I went, do you know that she would appreciate flowers? And he went, no. And I said, do you know someone who would know what they would appreciate more? And he went, yeah. And I went, why don't you ask them? And I think it's just such a little thing of like, you know, I was recently onboarded as a client to an organization, and they asked if I would fill out a form about my personal interests, about my family, about hobbies, about certain things. And they sent me a really meaningful gift to start a relationship. And so I think, you know, whether it's neurodiverse or neurotypical, I think the more we get to learn what makes people tick, what their blind spots, weaknesses, strengths, preferences are, and then cater to them, the more meaningful of an experience we will have.
I know we're running short on time, Shed, but something I'll throw in there just to echo exactly what you said. So our most junior leaders in the military, we tell them all the time, you need to make a leader book. And your leader book is made up of individual sheets of information that have your soldier, where they're from, what's their mom's name, what's their kid's name, what's their birthdays, all this information. And they're just like, why do I need to do this? And it's just like, if nothing else, what it will do is it will form a bond between you and that individual that they will now feel comfortable coming to you when they need something or they need help or something like that, or looking for advice or something. And that's the kind of leadership relationship you should empower and want, not one where they're going to their buddies or they're going to somebody else because they don't trust you or they don't feel comfortable coming to you.
Nice. Beautiful. Beautiful. Nate, Hiren, thank you so much both for joining us and for the work that you're both leading and doing. Any final words, or how can we learn more? How can we support? How can we take more action with you? Any closing words from the both of you?
Yeah. Shed, I'll just kick off to say awareness to acceptance to action is the path. There's a lot of great organizations with that knowledge to assist you in that journey. When you're Googling or searching on LinkedIn, you'll find lots of resources. And so start the conversation, start promoting this, because I think, to your point, Shed, neurodiversity is the poster child for intersectionality: race, gender, sexual orientation, socioeconomic. It's all here. So when we look at this community, in fact, we can think about how we help others in the space.
Love it. Love that, Hiren. Thank you. Nate?
I would say that, let's focus our energies on how we can build a better culture inside our organization today based on the individual and the individual's needs. We've moved out of the 80s and 90s where everything was very industrialized, and we're looking for how much I can suck out of you and that sort of thing. Now let's get back to the personal and find out what those individual strengths are. And you may never know that somebody just happens to be a world champion bowler, and they can use those skills and abilities of some sort of advantage to you and your organization if you don't sit down and actually talk to them and know your people and build that personal relationship.
Love it. Love it. Last one here from Mary. Do you both know of any educational resources, particularly around neurodivergent, neurodiversity, anything else that we can leave with folks so they can keep the awareness, acceptance, and action going?
One quick one from an organizational perspective, Mary. If you go to the Disability IN website, there is a Neurodiversity Employer Roundtable. I'm one of the founders of the Roundtable, hence I know there's a playbook on there that University of Washington wrote and a number of other things. But if you literally just go to the bookstore or online bookstore, tremendous amount of information that exists today, articles, books, things of that nature. But Nate, anything you want to add from a resourcing side?
No, I would say the same thing. Some you can just Google, to be perfectly honest with you, and you'll find some amazing books that are out there, that are great resources for individual leaders as well as others who are trying to grow in the space and just be exposed to the other side of things. And the more I think we can broaden ourselves and understand better what someone is going through, the better chance you are to have a more influential impact to them and the organization.
Yeah, and by the way, Nate and I are quite passionate, so hit us up if you want some help.
Nice. And here, what was that link again? Did you say disability.in?
Yeah, disability in, and then specifically Neurodiversity Employer Roundtable.
Got it.
If you look for that, you would find a playbook, and there's a landing site, and that's more from an organizational side, Chad.
Got it. Awesome. Okay, cool. I will find that and put that in the chat here as well. Thank you so much, both Hiren and Nate. Thank you, everyone who tuned in, and for those who watched the recording as well. Take care of the people around you. We can make a better world if we adopt what we discussed here today. So let's do it. Thanks all.
Take care.